What movie are you surprised that hasn't had a sequel yet? I wish they'd done a better job with the Narnia movies so they could have made Silverchair and Last Battle great source material. Big Hero 6, super successful movie from a category that often has sequels, superhero movies, with an ending that calls for a sequel. Weird. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. There actually is a sequel book, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, but Roald Dahl hated the adaptation of his first book. He disagreed with Gene Wilder's casting, thought the movie took too much focus away from Charlie. The book is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and didn't like how they made Slugbert the spy for Wonka. In the book he's just a one-off character. I think it's highly likely Dahl refused to give the studio the rights to make a Great Glass Elevator movie. I know people don't like Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory adaptation, but it was actually more book accurate than the Wilder adaptation. We had a teacher whose kids saw a fellow in one of the malls in Reno, blurted out he's black. He didn't take it well. Our daughter in first 2 years of primary school used to talk about the chocolate girls. She was 5'6" at the time, so I didn't discuss correct terminology quite then. A couple of years and she had it all. Talking of a couple of years later, she didn't believe that Barack Obama's name was Barack. She was convinced his name was Black Obama. Definitely the first 4 years anyway. She called his black. She would not believe when we would try and correct her. She'd laugh at us like we were teasing her. Oh, that's funny. I grew up in a very white part of England, Bournemouth, and first time I saw a black family was in church. During service I loudly said, "Why are those people so dirty looking?" My mom says it was the most embarrassing moment of her life. My youngest brother had a phase where he went up to all the black girl toddlers and some full-grown waitresses, and said they were pretty like chocolate. I always ended well, but we came to the conclusion he has a type. He looks like Dennis the Menace with thick glasses. I remember my mom telling me that the first time I saw a black man, I am Bulgarian so there's not a lot of black people here. I was around 4 and I said, "Look mommy, a monkey," and her response was, "Yeah sweetie, that's a monkey." Apparently, she wasn't paying attention and thought I saw a balloon in the shape of a monkey. Luckily, the man laughed it off and told me that he indeed wasn't a monkey. It turns out that I've heard my father use that word when referring to black person. Not in person, he did that when watching soccer games and his team would lose. When I was real little, Dad was at my preschool helping fix their computers or something, and the teacher came up and asked what I did this weekend. Having just completed the first part of Lego Star Wars 2, A New Hope, I eagerly told her we killed the black man. My dad had to quickly explain I meant it in a literal sense because Darth Vader was actually black. This reminds me of a family story, and I am absolutely compelled to tell it. While no one involved was actually a child, there are parallels. It was sometime in October of 1938. My paternal grandparents were on a passenger liner headed to Buenos Aires. Alongside many neighbors, like their parents, they were swallow migrant workers in what was then interwar Poland, but is currently in western Ukraine. To this very day, many of the residents in their hometown have coloring a lot like mine, light brown hair or lighter, and lighter eyes, and oftentimes, and many have familiar surnames from some branch of my family tree. Needless to say, even having black hair and brown eyes was a bit of a rarity in the time and place. They knew that not everyone was white, but none of them had ever seen their first black person. Finally, they landed in Buenos Aires from Gdansk. The journey took several months, and my grandparents actually became first-time parents before arriving. Once they were there, they saw a robust Afro-Brazilian man outside of one of the hotels. Needless to say, I'm certain that at least one passenger said something like that, and it probably was not a child. When I was 4 or 5 and in preschool, one of the kids in the class with me was black, and we got into an argument because he said he was black, and I was very insistent that he was brown. I didn't have much concept of race back then, but I was pretty sure I knew my colors. When I was somewhere around 4, I was at Walmart with my mom and there was a woman in front of us in the returns line. She had an unlit cigarette in her mouth, apparently loud as can be. I said, "Mom, she's got a smoker in her mouth. She's gonna die." Once I was at the grocery store and had my cam walker boot, knee-high, on. Some little boy, around 6 I'd guess, asked his mom, "Is that lady part robot?" I laughed, but she looked like she wanted to disappear. My daughter said this shit 3 days ago, "Mommy, that guy has a big full belly," while pointing and shit, loud as all fuck. My wife and I were fucking traumatized. Homie was only like 15 feet from us too. Sorry dude, my daughter's an asshole to us too. My son had a best friend at daycare and he says that they looked exactly the same except that his friend Buka had brown on him, but the only major difference when I asked him was that their backpacks were different. Kids. I am Kazakh and I'm looking way more Japanese-like than I should be because I'm not Japanese, so when I saw a legit Japanese person, she said something in anime and I just waved to her. That was the strangest encounter I've ever had. My mom told me when I was in a stroller, but still old enough to talk, I asked her shouting on a train ride if a black man on the ride was an edder, Swedish N-word but at the time more socially accepted. We even had pastries called nedgerballer, basically N-word balls, in cafes at the time, which is chocolate balls. Probably someone older pointed out it means black, thinking it was funny. Mom thought she was about to get beat up with the toddler though. So when I was in kindergarten we had a parent art day or some such nonsense. After hand painting was lined up at the sink at a line, and my mom told me to wash my hands. Now as a kid already in line behind a mother and her kid, I said I can't, her big ass is in the way. That wonderful black lady had such a WTF look on her face staring at my mom. I'll always remember that. I don't get things told to me over and over again now. Malicious compliance is a wonderful thing. Not about race, but I once had my cousin's 6-year-old kid tell me if I believe in Jehovah. I told him I'm not religious. He then looks at me confused and tells me that I'm not going to paradise. I wasn't offended because at least I get birthdays and get to celebrate Christmas. In an airport, my 6-year-old niece pointed at a guy wearing a turban and asked me very loudly if that's what a terrorist looks like. I wanted the ground to swallow me up. My youngest sister used to point at people and say, "Mom, look at how ugly that woman is," loudly when she was 5-6. Mom used to say that she felt like she was walking with a ticking bomb every time they went out. My youngest sister used to point at people and say, "Mom, look at how ugly that woman is," loudly when she was 5-6. Mom used to say that she felt like she was walking with a ticking bomb every time they went out. When my daughter was 3 years old she called, very loudly and enthusiastically, a woman in a niqab ninja. I wanted to disappear. Okay, but jokes aside, when I was little, there was a chocolate-scented perfume commercial and the man who sprayed it all over himself turned into chocolate and all the women would run after him and grab pieces from his limbs and eat it. So, I see where she is coming from. Edit. Oh my god, it's more terrifying than I remembered. A teacher of mine said the first time his son saw a black man he toddled over and tried to scratch the paint off. This post has been automatically removed after receiving a significant number of reports. This occurs due to lack of proper flair, reposting, use of memes, or other rule violations. If you believe this is an error, Please message the moderators, I am a bot, and this action was performed automatically. Please contact the moderators of this subreddit if you have any questions or concerns. My mom told me that when I was a toddler she had taken me to the dentist. In the office was a little black boy about my age playing with the basic office toys you find in such places. Anyways, I apparently wouldn't leave this kid alone and kept trying to pet his hair because I was fascinated by a dark-skinned kid. His mother and my mother thought it was hilarious watching me terrorize that poor boy. Unless you're from Sudan or a region where your skin is actually black, then you're black, otherwise you're technically brown. Or burn sienna. When I was little I thought that normal pronunciation of black people were the N-word, and I literally said that Obama wasn't black, he was N. For some reason this reminds me when I was a tourist in the US at the age of 10, I sat in front of a black man who was reading in the SF subway. I must have stared at him or something, because when he left he sneakily handed me his nice bookmark while my family didn't notice. I hid it in my jacket, but unfortunately I lost it somehow, which made me sad. Didn't even get the chance to say thank you. My daughter once loudly asked why someone was so large while standing right behind them in line. Another time she loudly exclaimed about one guy looking so old she was surprised he could still walk around. Lol, kids are messed up. I love how I did almost the exact same thing as a kid. Lol. The first time I saw a black person I also asked my mom very loudly if that man was made out of chocolate. Much to my mom's embarrassment, he and everyone else on the bus thought it was adorable. A friend of mine loves telling the story of when his brother was a little boy. Some context first. This was in the late 80s or early 90s. During these years, you could still sometimes find gollywog toys. These toys depicted an offensive caricature of a black person, charcoal black skin, big red lips, etc. Safe to say they have since been depopularized due to being extremely racist. Also during this time, there was a popular advert on TV for a blackcurrant fruit juice that depicted cartoon characters that looked very similar to a gollywog. So back to the story. My friend's brother is about 2 or 3 years old and is with his mom at a hospital appointment. They are in the waiting room and he is rummaging through the communal toy box and finds a gollywog. He gets excited, thinking of the blackcurrants on the TV, so exclaims to his mom he has found a blackcurrant. What causes the real issue is him being still a little boy. He has yet to perfect pronouncing his R's. So in a room full of people, this small child picks up a gollywog toy and loudly yells, "Look at this black cunt." Safe to say my friend's mom was mortified. So it's circa 2002. My youngest brother was about 3 years old. We're in the supermarket and he is sitting in the trolley seat. He points over my mom's shoulder and shouts at the top of his lungs, "Look, Mom, there's bin Laden." My mom, myself and my other brother all turn round to this big 6+ foot, older Sikh guy walking behind us. I still remember when I saw a black guy for the first time. I was like 3 or 4 years old. It was in a bus with my mom and I asked out loud, "Why is this man black?" And before my mom answered my question the guy came to me with a big smile and said, "It's because I eat too much chocolate." No wonder why I never ever thought of being racist. Smile. My daughter is reading a book with a black woman in it. She says, "It's me. I am so pale I sunburn. I'm 20 minutes. Think that's sweet." My dad's best friend is black. Apparently, I was a very happy and satisfied baby and rarely ever cried, so when my dad's best mate flew from Toronto to Vancouver just to meet me, my parents were very excited. Apparently he walked into my room and looked at me in my bassinet and I immediately started screaming and crying in pure, unbridled terror. Sorry, Uncle Jay. One time there was a man sitting in front of his house, he a very obese person. I, still a young kid living in a country where obesity was pretty rare, walked up to him and asked, "Sir, why are you so fat?" He just casually responds by asking, "Why are you so skinny?" My grandma was from a remote rural area of Spain, really small chances to see a black person. The first time she saw one she was like 6 or so when she went to the city, and she was so shocked. She thought the guy was sick or something and asked her older sister, who told her something about how the black people was also children of God, and as long as they behaved their souls were white too. Which is maybe not the best explanation ever, but for a rural ultra-Catholic context it wasn't that bad, I guess. My son had a best friend at daycare, and he says that they looked exactly the same except that his friend Buka had brown on him, but the only major difference when I asked him was that their backpacks were different. Kids. I am Kazakh and I'm looking way more Japanese-like than I should be because I'm not Japanese, so when I saw a legit Japanese person, she said something in anime and I just waved to her. That was the strangest encounter I've ever had. My mom told me when I was in a stroller, but still old enough to talk, I asked her shouting on a train ride if a black man on the ride was an N-word, Swedish N-word, but at the time more socially accepted. We even had pastries called negerballer, basically N-word balls, in cafes at the time, which is chocolate balls. Probably someone older pointed out it means black, thinking it was funny. Mom thought she was about to get beat up with the toddler though. So when I was in kindergarten we had a parent art day or some such nonsense. After hand painting was lined up at the sink at a line, and my mom told me to wash my hands. Now as a kid already in line behind a mother and her kid, I said I can't, her big ass is in the way. That wonderful black lady had such a WTF look on her face staring at my mom. I'll always remember that. I don't get things told to me over and over again now. Malicious compliance is a wonderful thing. Okay, these movies might be worse than I remember as I was in middle school when they came out, but Jumper and I Am Number 4 were movies I always thought would be cool to have a sequel. Edit, I Am Number 4 came out later than I expected. Tron 3, as a lifelong Tron fan and a huge enjoyer of Tron Legacy, Disney's decision to shelf the project always angered me. Cabin in the Woods, not that it could support the sequel, but it could totally do a Cloverfield-type pivot to a different film within the same universe. I wish they had intended the world in that one, cause it was probably the greatest horror comedy of all time after Shaun of the Dead. Tin Thin, it's an underrated masterpiece, with Steven Spielberg, John Williams, Edgar Wright, Jamie Bell, Daniel Craig, Andy Serkis, and Peter fucking Jackson. It deserves a fucking sequel. I will die on this hill. Chronicle was such a good concept. I think it did a really good job of exploring what superhuman powers would look like realistically. They just needed to commit to the darkness of the storyline, trying to water it down to keep it in that PG-13 rating made it too adult and dark for you but too juvenile for the audience that would appreciate Dane DeHaan's performance. I am Kazakh and I'm looking way more Japanese-like than I should be because I'm not Japanese, so when I saw a legit Japanese person, she said something in anime and I just waved to her. That was the strangest encounter I've ever had. My mom told me when I was in a stroller, but still old enough to talk, I asked her shouting on a train ride if a black man on the ride was an N-word, Swedish N-word, but at the time more socially accepted. We even had pastries called negerballer, basically N-word balls, in cafes at the time, which is chocolate balls. Probably someone older pointed out it means black, thinking it was funny. Mom thought she was about to get beat up with the toddler though. Why has no one said 2004's robots see a need, fill a need? I mean, it won't be the same without Robin Williams, But the story itself, with Rodney helping robots against corporate planned obsolescence and a heavy rich v-poor angle, was so much fun. Bit and delicious, yes. Still amazing, yes.